Well, this is my third attempt now for Screencast Part 2. But hey, you never know if you don't try. So, a few notes that I would like y'all to add um, on pages 6, 7 that I think would be important for you. So, first of all, on page 6, the prep book does talk about this, but just to be aware that the cerebral hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. And again, that's the bundle of nerves that do obviously connect those that we talked about in screencast 1. So just make sure you kind of note that. Secondly, on page 7, under the reticular formation, again, these are things that are mentioned, but I want to make sure that these are very clear. The reticular formation or reticular activating system really is a filter system for attention. It's almost like a net, and they talked about the translation of that term. And so as sensations come up through the inner neurons of the spinal cord, the reticular formation is really the gateway into the brain, and it filters what actually gets in there. And so if there's something that's not so important, like the feel of your socks on your feet, then it's going to filter that out. Your brain doesn't need to know that. This is especially important when we're sleeping and what gets into the brain and what doesn't. And then the thalamus, your book specifically talks about the four senses that do go through the thalamus. But this, I want to make sure you really, really note, because again, this is important. Smell is the sense that does not go through the thalamus. So important to note that. And when we talk about sensations in our next unit, we'll talk more about the pathway that smell actually takes. And then before we go on with the rest of the screencast, just want to point out again that on, oh crud, it says mnemonics on binder page 9. It's not page 9, it's page 8. Another mistake. But anyway, those I've got some. I think they're silly, but they'll help you really understand the functions of the part of the brain. And there's just so many that anything we can do to help our memory would be good. So again, that's binder page 8, not page 9. And I also connected another screencast of a teacher friend of mine who does brain mnemonics as well. And that's linked on the lesson page. So, oh, well, there we go again. All right. So just a little bit left with the limbic system. That's, a specialized system within the brain, and it's in charge of our emotions. So really, when we are, in love with somebody and we feel for them, we really should say that we brain you instead of we heart you, because our emotions do come from the brain. Ha ha, get it? It wouldn't be a day without one of my jokes, I know. But our emotions do come from our brain. And I just pulled up another slide to show you, here again is the hippocampus, the part that deals with memory, so emotional memory. On the end of that, we have the amygdala, which is really, depending on what part is stimulated, it's about fear and disgust, but really powerful, usually negative emotions. And then again, the hypothalamus, which is above the pituitary gland. But the three of those together make up the limbic system. And again, I think your book kind of relates that to 2 instead of 3. So here's another mnemonic for you. The 3 parts of the limbic system. AHH, amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus. I feel better. Again, get it? Emotions. I feel better. Yeah, I'm a little stir crazy. Okay, so the other thing I want you to know is within and around the limbic system, we also have these reward centers. And your book talks about the importance of dopamine and helping us feel certain rewards. So dopamine it's not, it's an extra special feel-good neurotransmitter. And what happens is in some people, they really need a lot of dopamine in order to feel well. It's almost addictive to them, but they need more than the average person. And so we call this the reward deficiency syndrome. When in and around the limbic system, especially in and around the hypothalamus, where these dopamine receptors are, these reward centers are, they need to almost in certain people to be flooded in order to feel good. And so this is when we are likely to see addiction, gambling problems, shopping problems. So these are unlike a drug addiction, where yes, those drugs fit into the same area. These are activity, these are behaviors that people do that get to that same explosion, I guess you could say, of the neurotransmitter dopamine, and how there's again a biological connection in the brain to the behavioral actions that we're taking psychologically to feel better. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting, relatable idea between addiction that's not an addiction to a drug, but it could be even an addiction to a video game that plays that. So anyway, I just thought that was, like I said, a good, hopefully a good personal connection to see the biological connecting to the psychological. And then, okay, the other brain cell. So yes, most of our brain is made up of interneurons that have that chemical to electrical to chemical reaction, but we do have other cells that help in our brain, and these are called glial cells, and it's Greek for glue cells. And so again, it's on the bottom of page 7, but really the notes are on page 8 because the binder didn't copy like I wanted it to. But anyway, so I'm going to talk to you about that, but also know in your prep book, they do have a little bit of information about this on page 58. Okay, but here we see in this picture glial cells that are, you can see they're supporting, they're helping these neurons, these interneurons of the brain. And unlike the neurons of the brain, there are no action potential. There's no electrical charge. All it is, and they don't house any of the neurotransmitters. Again, unlike the neurons of the of the brain, so they only chemically communicate. Only chemically communicate, and they are pretty darn important. They outnumber neurons 3 to 1, and so they have a very important role in supporting us in our brain. And most of this I already have for you in your binder, but the key function of glial cells is to clean, feed, and guide neural growth. And so important for us to maintain a healthy brain, because what they're going to do is as our brain works, those neurons in our brain work, we produce byproducts, we produce toxins like proteins that can build up as kind of like a plaque that can build up in your heart, but this is in your brain. And so these things can lead to things like Alzheimer's disease. And so these glial cells will help filter those out. They are much faster and more efficient when we sleep. And so again, in this time when so many of us are sleep deprived, that can damage the function of our brain. And especially if it's chronic sleep deprivation, over years and years of chronic sleep deprivation, we're going to see that there might be that there's a correlation, and of course, correlation is not causation, but there's a correlation between what happens with brain functioning and the barriers that are put in place for these glial cells. So that wraps up the presentation for the brain functions. What I'd really like you to do is go to the practices that are in Schoology and see how much you really know and what questions you have. I encourage you to go to AP Classroom and do any of the practices there or watch any of the videos there. I have also linked some other good videos on Schoology for you, and just I guess my help, I guess, from you would be, as you're doing these, to really make a note in your binders. What is it that you're not understanding? What is it that you want more of, either an explanation or more practice in from me? Because that's something I can really help you with. Okay, so thank you for being awesome students, and I hope I get to see you in person tomorrow.